You know that feeling, that almost invisible weight we sometimes carry?
Mm-hmm.
Imagine it like a sack you're carrying, maybe walking through a dense forest.
Okay.
At first it's light, you barely notice it, but then with each unresolved hurt, or maybe a kindness you forgot to offer, or a betrayal that just keeps playing in your mind.
Yep.
It's like another stone just appears in that sack.
Right.
And pretty soon, the path ahead just feels, well, heavy, doesn't it?
It does, very heavy. This accumulated weight,
Yeah.
this burden of things left unresolved,
Yeah.
it's such a human experience.
Yeah.
It really slows our steps,
Yeah.
narrows our view,
And that's exactly what we want to dig into today. This weight, this burden of unforgiveness, looking at it through a Buddhist lens.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to explore the power of letting go, what it really means to forgive, not just as some lofty idea, but as a way to actually lighten that load you're carrying.
A practical path.
Exactly. Now, I know the whole idea of forgiveness, it can be really complicated.
It can.
It's not always easy, is it, to just forgive and forget? So let's think of this as, well, a shared journey, trying to understand this in maybe a new light, a path towards feeling just a little bit more free.
A gentle exploration.
Yeah. Okay, so let's unpack this idea first, this inner weight. Where does it come from in this view?
Well, think about this weight from the perspective of cause and effect, but happening right inside our own minds.
Okay, not like external judgment, but internal consequences.
Precisely. The sources we looked at touch on this. It's not some divine scorekeeping. It's more the natural result of holding on to certain inner states.
Like what?
Like resentment. Holding on to resentment, it's like creating this echo chamber inside you.
Huh.
Every angry thought, every time you replay that grievance, it makes the echo louder.
Amplifies the negativity.
Exactly. It's like adding another stone to that heavy sack with every single unresolved feeling.
Right, so it's not about some outside force-keeping track, but really about how these unaddressed emotions just sort of take root and affect us directly. Mm-hmm.
And there's that really powerful image from the Buddha. Holding on to anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else.
You are the one who gets burned.
Yeah. That just hits home, doesn't it?
Right.
You think you're hurting the other person by staying mad, but the immediate, undeniable pain, it's your own.
Exactly, that heat. The heat of anger, of resentment, it consumes us from the inside out. It clouds our judgment, twists our understanding, keeps us trapped.
Trapped.
We become our own jailers, really, locked up by these feelings we haven't dealt with. And what's fascinating is how persistent this can be, even when we sort of know intellectually that it's hurting us.
Yeah, that disconnect between knowing and feeling. And to really see the potential for breaking free, even from like the most intense burdens, the material brought up Angulimala's story.
Yes.
I mean, here's a figure who caused immense harm, a real symbol of darkness, you could say.
And yet, when he encountered the Buddha, the response wasn't condemnation, but compassion. And ultimately, forgiveness led to his transformation.
It's a profound story.
This change from someone carrying such a terrible weight of actions to someone who actually found enlightenment, it really shows that even the heaviest sacks can be emptied, right?
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
Angulimala's story, it's such a potent reminder of that inherent capacity for change, for liberation, that exists within everyone, within every being, regardless of their past.
Wow.
If someone who carried such a dark history could find release, well, it speaks volumes about the possibility for each of us to unburden ourselves.
Yeah.
Whether that means forgiving others or, just as importantly, extending that forgiveness to ourselves.
It makes you think about how changeable our inner world really is.
It really does. It's quite malleable.
Which leads me to wonder then, what are the psychological hooks? Why do we cling so tightly to these hurts? Logically, letting go makes sense, but emotionally, there's often this real resistance. It can almost feel like we're losing something if we forgive, like we're letting the other person, off the hook.
That's a very insightful point. And it's common. Psychologically, yeah, holding on to anger can create this illusion of power.
Illusion.
Yes, a feeling that by staying angry, we're somehow still in control of the situation, or maybe holding the other person accountable in some way.
Right.
But as we've been saying, this control is often just that, an illusion. And the person we're really impacting most directly is ourselves.
Okay.
Now, what's really interesting is how modern psychology has kind of catching up, echoing this ancient wisdom.
How so?
Well, research clearly shows that unforgiveness triggers our body's stress response. Higher cortisol levels, weakened immune system. It's a very real physical manifestation of this inner turmoil.
So it's not just in our heads, it's actually making us sick, potentially.
It can contribute to chronic conditions, yes. It puts a strain on the system.
And the flip side, what happens when we do forgive?
Well, the studies show measurable benefits. Things like lower blood pressure, reduced anxiety, just a greater sense of overall well-being.
It's like our bodies breathe a sigh of relief.
Precisely. The connection between mind and body is so profound, releasing that mental, that emotional burden of unforgiveness. It has a direct, positive impact on our physical health.
Like finally setting down that heavy sack.
Yes.
Allowing your whole system to just relax.
The sources use this really beautiful image of ocean waves.
Yes.
Thinking of offenses, the things that hurt us, like waves crashing on the shore. Some are small ripples, maybe others feel like huge tidal waves. But the nature of a wave, it rises and then it falls. It doesn't just stay there crashing forever.
Impermanence.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And forgiveness in this picture is like taking a step back from the edge of the water.
Okay.
Observing the waves as they come and go, acknowledging their power, their impact, sure, but not letting them pull you under, not letting them define the entire coastline of who you are. That's a very evocative way to put it. It really highlights the temporary nature of both the events themselves and our emotional reactions to them.
Right.
By creating that space, by stepping back, we gain perspective. We can witness the wave without being completely overwhelmed by it, without letting it dictate our whole inner state.
And this idea of gaining perspective, it leads into this really fascinating practice from Tibetan Buddhism called Tonglen.
Tonglen, giving and taking.
Yeah, giving and taking, it sounds almost backwards.
Yeah.
How does this practice, where you consciously take on the suffering of others, how does that relate to releasing our own burdens and finding forgiveness?
Well, what's truly transformative about Tonglen is how it directly confronts our usual self-centeredness.
Which often fuels resentment, right?
Exactly, it fuels it. So Tonglen is a meditation where you intentionally visualize breathing in the suffering of others.
Right.
Their pain, their anger, their fear. Conceptually, of course.
Okay.
And then on the exhale, you breathe out compassion, healing, relief, calm.
It feels counterintuitive. Like, why would you want to invite suffering in? Our instinct is to push it away.
It is. But if we think about that core Buddhist idea of interconnectedness,
Right.
everything being linked,
Right.
then we start to see the wisdom here. By deliberately focusing our attention outward on the suffering of others, even those who might have hurt us, we begin to sort of dissolve the rigid boundaries of our own ego, our own hurt.
Oh.
We start to see their actions maybe as coming from their own pain, their own confusion, their own suffering.
Empathy.
Yes, this cultivation of empathy acts like a powerful solvent for resentment. It softens the heart. It fosters this deep sense of shared humanity. It's not really about absorbing their pain as your own, but more about recognizing the universality of suffering and choosing to respond with compassion.
So it shifts the focus away from my individual hurt
Yes.
to a broader understanding of the pain that just exists. And somehow in doing that, it lightens my own load.
Precisely. By actively engaging with others' suffering through compassion, we diminish the isolating power of our own pain. It connects us to something larger than just ourselves and helps us see our own stuff in a much wider context.
That leads to something really crucial the sources emphasize, getting clear on what forgiveness is. And maybe more importantly, what it isn't.
Yes, absolutely vital.
Because I think there are so many misconceptions floating around. People hear forgive and they think it means, I don't know, condoning bad behavior or pretending it never happened.
Exactly. And this is where so much of the difficulty comes from. It's essential, really, to understand that forgiveness is not about excusing harmful actions. It's not about wiping the slate clean or forgetting the past.
Or minimizing the pain.
Definitely not minimizing the pain. And it doesn't automatically mean you have to reconcile with the person or even say that what happened was okay. It wasn't okay.
Right.
These misunderstandings, they can make the whole idea of forgiveness feel, well, wrong.
Right.
Or even unsafe for some people.
So, if it's not those things, if those aren't the defining features,
Yeah.
then what is it? Fundamentally, what's at the core?
At its heart, forgiveness is an act of self-liberation.
Self-liberation. Okay.
It's the conscious choice to release yourself from the chains of resentment, anger, bitterness, all the things that bind you to the past. and bind you to the person who caused the pain.
So cutting the ties.
Cutting those emotional ties, yes.
Mm-hmm.
The ones that keep draining your energy now, clouding your present moment. You acknowledge what happened, the reality of it is still there, but you refuse to let it keep dictating your inner life.
You refuse to keep carrying it.
Exactly. It's an act of reclaiming your own peace, your own inner freedom.
That really reframes it, doesn't it? It puts the power back in our hands, not in the hands of the past or the other person. And the sources then gave us these really direct questions for self-reflection, like, what stones are you carrying in your sack? Whose face appears when you think of forgiveness? That's a pretty clear invitation to look inward, isn't it? To actually identify what we're holding on to.
Absolutely. Self-awareness is the first step, maybe the most crucial step on this whole path.
You can't let go of something if you don't know you're holding it.
Precisely. To begin to release the burden, we first have to be aware of what we are carrying, the specific hurts, the resentments, who or what they're connected to. And this takes a willingness, to be honest with ourselves, to gently acknowledge those uncomfortable feelings without judgment.
Gently. Yeah, that feels important. And then there's this beautiful idea presented about forgiveness as alchemy. Like transforming pain into power, suffering into wisdom, wounds into wholeness. How does that alchemical process actually happen inside us from this perspective?
Well, the profound understanding here is that nothing is ever truly lost or wasted. Even our deepest pain holds the potential for transformation. When we choose to engage with our suffering, but with mindful awareness and with the intention to forgive, we start to extract wisdom from it. We learn about our own resilience. We learn about the nature of suffering itself. We learn about that interconnectedness we talked about. The wounds we carry can, through this process, actually become sources of empathy, sources of strength. They allow us to connect more deeply with others who've had similar pain.
So it's like transmuting the lead of suffering
into the gold of wisdom and compassion. Yes.
It makes me think of that story, Tisa Gotami. The sources shared that one too.
A powerful teaching.
This woman, just utterly overwhelmed by grief after losing her child. She goes searching everywhere for a way to bring him back.
Desperate for a miracle.
Yeah. And eventually she realizes the universality of loss, of death and suffering. How does her journey connect with this idea of alchemy, of transformation?
Kisa Gotami's story just perfectly illustrates how confronting the truth of suffering, the fact that it's a shared human experience, not just my unique burden, can be the very catalyst for profound inner change and the beginning of forgiveness. Her initial grief was so isolating, right? All-consuming. But through her search, prompted by the Buddha, she came face to face with the fact that everyone experiences loss. Her pain wasn't unique.
That mustard seed from a house untouched by death.
Exactly. She couldn't find it. And that realization, that acceptance of reality, however harsh, allowed her to release her desperate clinging, to begin healing. In a way, you could say she forgave the universe for the pain of loss itself.
Wow.
And in doing that, her suffering became a pathway to wisdom, to spiritual awakening. Her pain, though initially overwhelming, ultimately led her to a much deeper understanding of life and death.
So acceptance, that radical acceptance of what is, seems like a really key ingredient in this whole transformative process.
It is fundamental.
Now, okay, the sources also gave some very practical tools, things we can actually do to cultivate forgiveness. Mindfulness meditation was one. How can simply paying attention to right now help us let go of something as deep-seated as resentment?
Well, mindfulness meditation trains us to observe our thoughts and emotions, including anger, including resentment without judging them, and crucially, without getting swept away by them.
Okay.
So when these feelings arise, instead of immediately reacting or trying to push them down, we just learn to acknowledge their presence, like noticing a cloud passing in the sky.
Just noticing.
Just noticing. And this detached observation creates a little bit of space, a buffer between the feeling and our usual reaction. Over time, this practice helps us see that our emotions are impermanent. They arise, they stay for a bit, they pass away.
They aren't solid.
Exactly. We learn that we are not defined by our anger, and we realize we have a choice in how we respond to it, and that weakens its grip on us little by little.
Okay, that makes sense. And another powerful tool mentioned was loving kindness meditation, Metta Havana.
Metta.
This involves extending wishes for happiness, health, freedom from suffering, not just to ourselves or loved ones, but also to difficult people. Even those who've caused us pain. That sounds incredibly challenging.
It can be. It can feel like a really significant stretch, especially when the hurt is still raw.
Yeah.
But the practice of metta isn't really about instantly conjuring up warm, fuzzy feelings for someone who harmed us. That might be unrealistic at first.
So what is it about then?
It's more about cultivating a fundamental shift in our intention, a recognition of their shared humanity, however flawed, a recognition of their own capacity for suffering, their own confusion perhaps.
Seeing the person behind the action.
In a way, yes. The aim is to gradually, patiently break down the walls of animosity, to foster that sense of interconnectedness we keep coming back to. Even if the warm feelings don't show up right away, the simple act of directing these wishes outward can start to soften the heart, loosen the grip of resentment. We might begin to recognize that harmful actions often stem from ignorance or fear or their own unresolved pain.
That understanding feels key. And the example of Nelson Mandela, it's so incredibly relevant here, isn't it?
Absolutely. A towering example.
I mean, 27 years, imprisoned. And he chose reconciliation, forgiveness, not revenge, that quote of his. As I walked out the door toward the gate that would lead to my freedom, I knew if I didn't leave my bitterness and hatred behind, I'd still be in prison.
Chillingly profound.
It just perfectly illustrates this idea of inner liberation, doesn't it?
Mandela's life truly embodies this deep wisdom, choosing forgiveness as a path not just to personal healing but collective healing too. He understood, didn't he, that holding on to bitterness would have kept him bound, kept him imprisoned inwardly, even after his physical release.
Yeah.
His choice wasn't weakness, it was immense strength, incredible foresight. He knew forgiveness was essential, not just for his own peace, but for the future of his entire nation.
And shifting focus slightly, the sources also brought up something that can be just incredibly hard, which is self-forgiveness.
Yes, often the hardest part.
We can be our own worst critics, can't we? Just
Yeah.
endlessly replaying mistakes, holding ourselves accountable in ways we'd never dream of doing to a friend.
It's true. Self-forgiveness is often the deepest, most challenging piece of this whole journey. We tend to have these impossibly high standards for ourselves, and we can be relentless in our self-criticism.
So how do we approach that?
Well, that teaching from the Buddha is so helpful here. You yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection. Just letting that sink in. Recognizing that making mistakes is just part of being human. We're all learning, we're all evolving. That's crucial. And cultivating self-compassion, treating ourselves with the same kindness, the same understanding we'd offer a dear friend who stumbled. That's really the foundation for forgiving ourselves.
Treating ourselves like a friend, that's a good reminder. And the practical exercise suggested writing that letter
Yes.
to the person we need to forgive, or maybe even writing it to ourselves. Getting out all those raw, unfiltered emotions, and then symbolically releasing it, burning it, tearing it up. That sounds like a really tangible way to start letting go.
Rituals like that can be incredibly potent, yes. They give a physical outlet for all that intense emotional energy we've been bottling up.
Right.
The act of writing lets us give voice to the pain, the anger, acknowledge its reality, and then the symbolic destruction, the burning, the tearing it, can represent a conscious decision, a choice to release those emotions and move forward. It can create a real sense of closure for some people.
Yeah, I can see that. And it's fascinating, too, that even modern science is starting to, well, validate these ancient ideas. You mentioned Dr. Fred Luskin's work at Stanford.
Yes, the Stanford Forgiveness Project.
Showing real, measurable benefits of forgiveness on stress levels, sleep, mental well-being. It just really highlights that mind-body connection again.
It absolutely does. Modern science is increasingly confirming the wisdom embedded in these ancient practices. Dr. Luskin's research gives us empirical evidence for the tangible, positive effects forgiveness has on our physical and mental health. It aligns perfectly with the Buddhist understanding of our interconnectedness.
So choosing forgiveness isn't just like an emotional or spiritual thing.
No, it's also a deeply beneficial act for our physical health and well-being.
It's holistic.
And the sources wisely reminded us, too, that forgiveness isn't usually a switch you flip.
No, definitely not.
It's an ongoing journey, right?
Right, no.
A process. It unfolds over time, needs patience, persistence. There might be good days and bad days.
Exactly. Healing takes time. And forgiveness is such an integral part of that healing. There will absolutely be days when it feels easier, and other days when old feelings bubble up again.
Yeah.
It's just so important to approach this whole journey with gentleness,
Yes.
self-compassion, recognizing it's a continuous unfolding, and every step forward, no matter how tiny it feels, is significant.
So if we try to bring all these threads together, the core message seems to be that forgiveness, ultimately, it isn't really for the other person's benefit primarily.
No.
It's profoundly for our own well-being. It's about reclaiming our inner peace, stepping out of that feeling of being a victim to the past. Precisely. It's about taking back control of our inner landscape, our inner world. By releasing that burden of unforgiveness, we stop being defined or controlled by past events or other people's actions. We become the architects of our own emotional freedom, you could say.
And that connects to the idea of non-attachment, doesn't it? Letting go of needing things to be a certain way externally.
Yes.
Like letting go of needing that apology that might never come, or that sense of perfect justice that feels just out of reach. True peace seems to come from that internal release.
Indeed. Clinging to the need for external resolution just keeps us tethered, emotionally, to the source of our pain. Non-attachment allows us to find a sense of peace, a sense of acceptance right here within ourselves, regardless of what's happening outside. Forgiveness, seen this way, is a really powerful expression of non-attachment.
The quick mention of Milarepa, that Tibetan yogi,
Another powerful figure.
who went from seeking vengeance to becoming this enlightened master, partly through self-forgiveness and spiritual practice. It's just another compelling example of that potential for really radical inner change.
Milarepa's journey powerfully illustrates that possibility of profound redemption and the transformative power of both forgiving others and, perhaps even more profoundly, forgiving oneself for past harmful actions. It shows that even from a place of deep negativity, the path to enlightenment, to inner peace, is always accessible. Through sincere practice, through the willingness to release those burdens of the past.
And it feels so important to clarify, like the sources did, that forgiveness doesn't automatically mean reconciliation.
Oh, absolutely vital distinction.
We can choose to forgive someone internally, release that bitterness, but still maintain healthy boundaries. Still protect ourselves, especially if a relationship remains toxic or harmful. Forgiveness can be a totally internal act.
Yes, this distinction is crucial. Forgiveness is that inner process, releasing the resentment. Reconciliation is about rebuilding trust, rebuilding a relationship. That might not always be possible or even advisable. We can absolutely choose to free ourselves from the weight of unforgiveness without condoning harm or allowing it to continue in our lives.
So when you boil it down, choosing peace, choosing joy, over holding on to pain, it's actually a pretty radical act of self-care.
It is.
A real declaration of independence from the past. It's like saying, you know what, I deserve to move forward unburdened with a lighter step.
It is indeed a profound act of self-love. By choosing forgiveness, we are prioritizing our own well-being. We're actively cultivating inner peace. It's an affirmation, really, of our inherent worthiness of happiness, of freedom from suffering.
And when that feels hard, when it feels like too much, the sources remind us of those practical steps again. Cultivating patience with ourselves, acknowledging our feelings without judgment, maybe using visualization or affirmations as little supports along the way.
Anchors?
Yeah, anchors we can hold on to when the journey feels rough.
These practices serve as gentle reminders that forgiveness is a gradual process. And we have resources, inner and outer, to support us. They help us navigate the inevitable bumps in the road with more kindness, more understanding towards ourselves.
And it's a beautiful thought too, isn't it? That our own personal act of forgiveness, however small it feels, might actually have a ripple effect.
It can.
Maybe inspiring others, contributing in some tiny way to a more compassionate, understanding world.
Our individual choices to release negativity, to embrace forgiveness, they really can create positive ripples, fostering greater understanding, greater compassion in our interactions within our families, our communities. By choosing peace within ourselves, we genuinely contribute to a more peaceful world, little by little.
And the unexpected gifts that can sometimes show up, improved relationships maybe, or a burst of creativity, new opportunities. It's almost like by clearing out that inner clutter of resentment, we actually create space.
Exactly right.
Space for more positive things to flow into our lives.
Holding on to resentment is incredibly draining. It consumes so much energy, so much focus. It limits our perspective. When we release that tight grip, we free up all that energy for more joyful, more fulfilling parts of life. It just opens us up to new possibilities, allows us to experience greater connection, greater creativity, a clearer mind.
So maybe just a final thought for everyone listening. As you go about your day, perhaps consider this. What new pathways might open up for you if you were to lighten your load, even just a tiny bit?
Yeah.
What unexpected treasures might you discover in the space that gets created simply by letting go? It's definitely a journey worth considering.